everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, joined by Ken Wiebe from Sportsnet. Together, we are Kenny and Renny, and this is the weekly long-form Kenny and Renny show. We took a week off last week for the All-Star break, but we are back at it, and we have a great show with two of our favorites coming up here. Kristina Rutherford from Sportsnet.ca, one of my favorite writers who I thought Ken did a really good job with some, when I started up in this job and started doing this beat, she came and she did an Evander Kane story around 2014, 2015 that was absolutely phenomenal. And she did a really revealing story on Connor Hellebuck that we ended up learning a lot of stuff about the guy. I'm always kind of amazed at her ability to kind of come out of nowhere and just, sew herself into a dressing room. She does a phenomenal job with that. We'll talk to her about that. And we're also going to have Arash Madani, the host of Blue Jays baseball, and just a jack of all trades. And I shouldn't even call him that. Jack of all trades kind of suggests that someone kind of jumps from sport to sport to sport and, kind of cruises over the surface of it. Arash Madani has an ability to go from sport to sport to sport and get a depth to that sport or get as deep in that sport as the guys who cover the beat. He's absolutely phenomenal at it. One of Canada's broadcasters of the year, named Canada's broadcaster of the year. I think it was 2017. We'll get into that kind of stuff, but going to have a great show with them. They'll be with us right away. First, Ken, let's just get into the news of the day. Marcus Foligno gets 2 games. We had chatted about it on the show. I thought he'd get 1 game. He ends up getting 2. Fair punishment? Did the league need to be heavier on this? What was your take?
Yeah, I think, Sean, what I would say is that all parties are fortunate that Adam Lowry was not injured based on the knee drop, nature boy Ric Flair style knee drop by Marcus Foligno. Obviously, we know what Adam Lowry had to say about it after the game. I mean, he didn't like it, but he also didn't go crazy about it. I think there is, Adam's a guy who has been suspended before, so I think, he's a guy who's not that he was holding back, but I think there's a little bit of that, mutual respect factor, even when something in the heat of the moment kind of happens. At least that was my interpretation of it. I mean, we know that in the explanation, because there was no injury, that factored into the number of games that were received. I mean, if he catches him square on instead of the side of his helmet, if there's a concussion there, I mean, is it a 5-game suspension? I don't know. I mean, this is always the debate. How much does intent play into it? How much does outcome play into it? I mean, we know it was a play that shouldn't happen in hockey or any other sport. Adam Lowry's fortunate he wasn't hurt, and Marcus Foligno is lucky Adam Lowry wasn't hurt. Because that would have been probably a much harsher penalty. I think 2 games is probably a reasonable amount. Again, in some ways, because we enjoyed the intensity of the game the other night, like, let's be honest, Sean, you and I want to see Marcus Foligno in the game next Wednesday, right? So if it's more than 2 games, then that's not happening. It's the last meeting of the year between. I'm not saying the league looked at that at all, but from a rivalry standpoint, you want players like that in the game because they ratchet up the intensity in the game. I mean, that doesn't mean there are now going to be 4 fights or there's going to be another round 3 between these 2 players. But you know that when Marcus Foligno is in the game, it's an intense game. So I think it'll be a fun game when these 2 teams get back onto the ice. But again, that's a play that shouldn't be happening, and it can't happen. And there is a penalty and a deterrent for it. I don't think it's a crazy penalty. I think it's probably a fair penalty given the outcome. And like I said, it could have been much worse for all parties.
I mean, it did make me think, because it's the same night with the Brad Marchand thing happening and him kind of going nuts. And it did make me think that clearly, Ken, we watched this game, and I've said this time and time again on this program, the game is not what it used to be by any means. I mean, there's a lot of nights out there that, the hits that are calculated in the game, you're thinking that's a hit. It's a no hit league compared to what it used to be. And I did wonder for a second here, like I said in the post game, I understand why Marcus Foligno got so angry. I'm not saying I understand him doing that. He clearly took it too far. You don't need to be doing that. A guy's defenseless when he's on the ice and refs are in between the 2 of you. There's nothing Adam Lowry can do in that situation to defend himself, so you don't go after a defenseless player. It doesn't need to happen. But I just wonder if what we're seeing here in those past 2 situations with Marchand and him on the same night is we're not used to the temperature being turned up that high in games. And so it's almost like these players are, kind of unable to control their emotions in these situations because we don't see the emotions travel that high. Whereas when we're talking about, like, the 90s and games between, the Oilers and the Flames, or if you go back to that rivalry between Detroit and the Avalanche, or if you even go and think of games like between Boston and Montreal, or Montreal and Quebec City, a game in the middle of the season was always that high at all times, right? And so I found it interesting. There's definitely situations with Marchand and Foligno where they took things too far. And I just wonder if it's the situation where people aren't used to emotions running that high and having to manage and control those high of emotions. Again, I thought I could see Foligno was frustrated and it was heading in that direction. Again, that's too far. Don't need that. But it's good I think it's a good outcome to your point, because I want to see him back. We'll be doing that game. It's a Sportsnet game. I'll be hosting that game on Wednesday. I want to talk about that situation during the game. So it's good that he's going to be in there. Great stuff all around. We don't want to wait too long. We're going to get right into this here. Our first guest is ready to join us. Is Kristina Rutherford jumps in. It's been a long time, Kristina. It is great to see you. How are you doing? I haven't seen you since you've been a new mom. How are things?
Oh, yeah, good. Yeah, good to see you guys too. Things are, they're good. We've got Mac in daycare now, so things are even better since he started daycare, because they know what they're doing. So yeah, all good over here.
Good to have people who know what they're doing. A little bit of background here. Kristina is one of my favorite people to work with. We've been on the road a ton of times before, and man, do we have a blast. But I'll be honest, I'm feeling a little left out here right now, because I look at 1, 2, 3 of us on screen, and I see I'm the only one here who didn't play university hockey. And so let's dive into that. It's very embarrassing. Let's dive into that and give us a little bit of your background in the sport as a university hockey player. Give me an idea of your history in the game of hockey and how it led you to where you are today, Kristina.
Sure. Sorry, my internet connection in that room is real bad, so I'm just moving.
Yeah, you're all over the place. This isn't starting out good.
This
you
is
need to
typical.
up your game here.
Okay, this is well lit, right? Okay, here we go.
Technical difficulties are on brand for us.
Okay, perfect. I grew up basically up the stairs from an outdoor rink, so my brother and I would be out there all the time. And I played in this awesome outdoor hockey league called the Swansea Girls Hockey League. It's been around for over 50 years. It's one of the oldest around. And my niece plays in it now. I still go to Renny rink and skate around all the time. But anyway, yeah, I played up until, I still play senior women's hockey and also shinny as frequently as I can. But yeah, I played at Western and I played sort of competitively growing up. I wouldn't say that I was like a real tough player out there. I suffered a number of injuries in university, one broken bone. But yeah, I'd say the strength of my game, which is probably the same as Ken's, a little bit of speed maybe. And yeah, I loved hockey from the start. I remember when I was really little, I told my parents that if I ever died, I wanted to be buried in my hockey equipment.
Fantastic. Good scouting report. Speed and student of the game. Those were my two qualities. And as Sean knows, I like to tell people my hands were made for typing. So I was not a Cole Perfetti type out there.
Oh my gosh, me too, Ken. And actually last weekend I was working on a toe drag in my brother's backyard, on his backyard rink. I'm 40 years old. I should know how to do a toe drag, and I can't get the hang of it. So, and the trouble with getting older, I think, too, is that your speed starts to deteriorate. And then what is the hallmark of your game? This is what I'm struggling with.
There you go. What drew you to the sport, though? Obviously you said you loved it from a young age, but what kept you going back, Kristina?
I think a lot of it actually was being able to play outside and the great outdoors and the people that I met along the way. Some of my best friends I've known since I was 6 or 7 years old, and I still see them weekly to play hockey, and we have the best chats, and they're the funniest people I know. I think women in hockey have, I don't know, myself aside, the best senses of humor of any of my friends. So that's kind of what did it for me. But also, too, just the speed, the feeling when you're rushing up the ice, not going to say the smell of the ice. I don't think it has a smell. I know some people say that, but yeah, just the intensity and the pace and, I don't know, the feeling after you win, the camaraderie in the dressing room, all that stuff. That's what kept me going.
You know, it's funny you say the smell of the ice because you're 40, so you'll be old enough to remember this. When we were young and parents could still smoke in the rink, so your parents would watch the games and they'd be puffing smokes in behind the glass. That smell of the ice that you're talking about mixed with smoke, cigarette smoke, was like my favorite smell growing up. Like stepping into that rink, into the cloud of smoke. I don't know why, but it was.
What's wrong with you?
Clearly you associate
That's the
it with like
question.
everything that you're doing out on the ice. Clearly that smell. It's not that I love the cigarette smoke, but to me that was hockey. That smell was hockey. I wanted to kind of, people don't go to the level that you went to, play university hockey and stay with the game as much as they did without help from their parents. I'm interested in your mom is a hockey mom, your dad is a hockey dad. Clearly you're a person who, and we're going to get into this, but like kind of fights for what they believe in the game and carves out space for women in hockey. Usually there's parents behind that kind of push. Who gave you that push, mom, dad, or both?
I would say primarily my dad. So playing at Western since I left has won, national championships. When I was there, we were so bad and we didn't really have, I don't want to slag my old coach, but we had a real estate agent as a coach, and he suggested once that we work on our snowplow stops, which is not a stop that you want at an elite-ish level. So it was so bad, and my dad used to drive from Toronto to London. That's a good 2 hours. London's in the snow belt, to watch every single game. And he also, when I was playing at Swansea, I thought that was the only league on the planet. And luckily I had this great coach there named Ted Meeking, and he told me about this other league called Leaside. And he actually recruited me when one of his players, I think, went back to Ringette. So I started with the Toronto Red Wings, and got number 7. I just took over the number of the last girl that was there. And that's, again, where I met some of my closest friends. And that was sort of how I started into the higher levels of hockey. But I would say both of my parents, too, because my brother and I grew up doing a little bit of skiing on weekends and doing other fun family things. And then, as you know, hockey just takes over everything, right? And I'm pretty sure my parents, between the two of them, were in the rink at least 3-4 times every weekend and then through the week. And yeah, so both of them, I would say.
Christine, another thing we love to do is tell the story of the storyteller. How did you get bitten by the journalism bug, and specifically the writing bug, I guess?
Well, my dad actually was a journalist before I was born, and he worked for a couple of community newspapers. And he used to talk about how awesome it was, specifically that he didn't have to sit in a cubicle all day, and he got to go talk to people and eat great food and sometimes travel. And I just thought that sounded amazing. And while I was at Western, I had no direction. I know that Reynolds will find that shocking, but I didn't know what I wanted to do at all. And I just knew, I should play out my 5th year of eligibility of my illustrious university hockey career here. And they had a journalism program, and my dad sort of said, why don't you? They had a master's 1 year. And I got in from a waiting list. I'd done 0 writing before that. But I have to say, the first day that I did classes, I thought, okay, I got to try really hard to make this work because this sounds awesome. If I can get a job one day. And I feel, I don't know about you guys, I feel really fortunate to be able to have done this for as long as I have, and still really feel when I go to an event, like, get chills. And when I find out a cool piece of information, today we published a story on Marie-Philippe Poulin, and she drives an RV, and she told me that on the phone. And honestly, that just felt like the best breaking news I've ever heard, just little tidbits like that about people that I think we often see and we don't get to see maybe, their personality as much as their on-ice performance. I love kind of delving into those. That's such a long answer. I don't even remember the original question. But anyway, my dad is the reason, because he was a journalist himself and told me about how awesome it was.
You use the word delving into your interview subjects. I have a great and deep admiration for how you do the job and your ability to do that. You said you bring up Marie-Philippe Poulin and the bit about her driving around in the RV. It makes me think of some of the stories you came into Winnipeg and did. Like, for example, everyone learned that Connor Hellebuyck had his spleen removed because you got into the room and you figure that out, right? And I also remember before that, the very first time I met you, you came rolling into town. I was working for Sportsnet. You had an interview with Evander Kane. The Jets PR department didn't even know that you had this interview set up. And so clearly, you're very good at traveling those channels behind the scenes, but also getting in and earning the trust. You don't get tidbits. You don't get information no one else has got, unless you earn the trust of those interview subjects. So I wanted to get your take on the philosophy of how you go about, I don't want you to give up any of the trade secrets, but your philosophy of building trust between you and your interview subjects.
Well, thanks for all the compliments there. I really admire the way you can bike to the rink and then go on Hockey Night in Canada and look like you didn't bike to the rink, and how much pizza you can eat. But I would say the number one thing, whenever I'm doing a bigger feature, I think my number one aim is to speak to as many people around the subject as I can. So say my subject is Marie-Philippe Poulin. I will go into that interview probably having spoken to 6 or 7 people about her. And I'm very lucky to be afforded the time to do that. But once I'm able to do that, and I always think of Phil Kessel when this comes up, because Phil Kessel does not enjoy talking. And I worked on a story. I tried to get him to talk to me for about a year and a half. And finally he said yes. And by that point, I knew everything about that guy. Like, I knew his dog's name. I knew how much he liked Skittles. I knew how he swam with little kids in Florida over his break over the summer. I knew that he did gymnastics as a child. And I think when you can go into an interview and have that type of knowledge, A, you creep the person out, but B, they realize that you have done a lot of homework, and they maybe feel more comfortable, especially if you've spoken to a family member or two. I think they feel more comfortable kind of opening up. That's at least what I've found so far.
What do you enjoy most about the process, of that unearthing process, and when you can find things about your subject?
I think it's the genuine shock I feel when somebody that I maybe perceive as being a little bit dry doesn't turn out to be a little bit dry. And yeah, Connor Hellebuyck telling me he didn't have a spleen, the way he told me was, my spleen ruptured and and I was like, what? And my jaw hit the floor. I think it's those moments that really stand out for me. And then I think, like, how am I going to weave that into the story? I get very interested in doing that too. But yeah, it's those tidbits, because I think in our profession, a lot of people feel, oh, we're the experts on so-and-so. We're the experts on this team. And I don't know that anybody's truly an expert on anybody, but I think once you can find out new information and bring that to light, that's what I really enjoy about it.
Maybe my favorite story of yours you've ever done was on Jaromir Jagr. That was a really, really interesting one. And I always like to use a tidbit from there because, we're getting up there in years. We're all in our 40s. And so we've seen Wayne Gretzky play, and we've seen Mario Lemieux and those guys play. And you'll have guys, kids come along these days, and they never saw them play, so they don't realize how good they were. Just the same as I don't have a true realization of how good Bobby Orr was, because I never saw him play. But you're always looking for those links between the past and present that kind of tell you where guys stand in the history of the game. And there's a great line from that story that you did of Jagr talking about, you'd ask him about Gretzky and Mario Lemieux, and him saying, oh, hold on a second. Like, you can't put me in that category. Those guys are a step above anything he'd ever seen before. And you're talking about the guy who's got the second most points ever in the history of the game. I guess it's a long way of me getting to, like, you getting really good information and getting close to a guy who's an all-timer in the game. And I wonder if there's ever any moments when you're kind of climbing the echelon of interview subjects to someone who has as much stature as Jaromir Jagr had. Is there an intimidation factor that comes in there? Or maybe a different way of asking that question, is there a way you approach people of that stature differently than you do your typical interview subject?
I have to say, when I first started, it wasn't even when I first started. I would say even 5 years into working for Sportsnet. I've been there for a decade now. I remember being at a NHL media day and watching my hands shake while I was talking to people. And I didn't feel nervous, but I think I was, and I didn't even realize it. I honestly can say I didn't sit down. I did sit down with Yager and think, oh my goodness, this guy is a legend. And the things he told me, I had such a fun time talking to him over the course of 2 days. And he was so open and honest and funny. And I had enough stories from other people that I could relate to him. And then he would, break off into a whole other avenue on that. But I think personally, my approach is usually just to try and forget about all of that stuff and talk to the person like a regular human being who might love Kit Kats and have trouble finding jeans that fit because his butt's really big, And that's the stuff, it's the relatable stuff that I think makes people like Yager even more entertaining to talk to, those types of things.
Kristina, you have to have a genuine curiosity in order to tell great stories. Where does your curiosity come from?
I've been told by many people that I ask too many questions. So I think I was born with it. And I don't know, I find people really interesting. I think this is weird to be on the other end of the questions. Like, I have lots of questions for you guys. It's a genuine enjoyment of talking to people, and I maybe have had it since I was a kid. And this is a nice way to harness it and keep it maybe less annoying for the people that I live with. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you this. I think you're the perfect person to ask this because not only did you play the game, but you cover the game the way it is. And I know that you're, I don't want to say an advocate, but you cover and advocate for covering the women's game in an equal manner, making sure it gets the honor and the respect it deserves. I take a look at sports and two stand out for me. So curling and tennis, I feel, are two sports that the women's game gets, kind of equal billing as the men's game. And I think one of the reasons it does is because if you take a look at the women's tennis game, it's kind of more about strategy, whereas the men's game is about overpowering your opponent. It's kind of the same thing in women's curling. To be quite honest, I far prefer watching women's curling because there's so much more strategy involved, whereas the men just at some point don't like what they're seeing and they throw a rock and they just clear everything out, right? Mm. Do you see a difference in the women's and men's game in hockey that would maybe provide that opportunity to say this is what makes the women's game special and unique while still celebrating the game of hockey at its very base?
I think, honestly, the one thing I notice as I have gotten older and started playing myself, not to make this about me, but playing with men, they always talk about how the women on the ice are the smartest people on the ice. We are always in the right spot. And I think if you watch a women's game, and there's so much more maybe going on the ice than there might be in a men's game, just because there has to be, because there's a bit less power on the whole, right? And just in terms of the passes and the playmaking. And I don't know, I think of that Canada-US game in the Olympics, and watching Poulin just kind of like come out of nowhere, grab the puck, go on a breakaway, get a penalty shot, score on the penalty shot. And I think that's a moment where I go, why isn't everybody watching this? Why isn't this accessible to fans as often as the men's game is? And I find it greatly frustrating. And I know the women in the game do too. And the one thing I really struggle with is it feels like they get asked the same questions over and over. When is this going to be better for you? When is there going to be a viable future? And I don't know what the answer is. I don't think they know what the answer is. And it's tough because I would rather just cover women's hockey for it being this incredible product. And I do that as often as I can, but often you do get pulled into those conversations about how to make the game better, which are important conversations. But I don't think every story should focus on that.
So interesting. I mean, that goal was, I mean, again, the explosiveness to create the breakaway and then the goal itself. I mean, in some ways, Christina, it was so interesting. It reminded me of the 2010 Olympics when everyone was, what's wrong with Sidney Crosby? He hadn't scored forever, right? I mean, Poulin was playing great, tons of assists. I mean, is that a sign of progress, or is that a sign of people not paying attention and seeing her impact in other areas that go beyond goal scoring?
I think it's a sign of progress for sure. The Canadian team is so stacked, and they've got incredible young talent like Sarah Fillier immediately comes to mind. She's phenomenal, so skilled. I think it's also to Poulin. I mean, in 2010 when she scored that game winner, she was kind of a fourth liner. And also in Sochi, she wasn't on one of the top lines. She hasn't always been the type to put up a ton of points, but she puts up points always when it matters. And I think as she's gotten older and there's more attention on her, other teams are giving her special attention because they need to shut her down. It's allowing her teammates to step up, right? So I think it's a sign of progress. And it's also just that's the way she plays the game. She comes up with the big moments when the big moments are needed. I'm interested to see what happens with her as we are getting into the medal rounds too.
Kristina, you talked about the women in the game having to answer the same questions over and over again. They kind of have to put up with the same BS storylines over and over again, which brings me to Rosie DiMano's story about attacking women's hockey at the Olympics again. Give me an idea of the harm that argument popping up over and over again does and keeps us having a conversation that probably shouldn't have been had in the first place.
Yeah, I can honestly say I didn't read the whole article. I read enough of it to shut my computer and utter some words. And I was really happy to see like Haley Salvian and Jana Hefford both wrote articles for The Star and for The Athletic in defense of Rosie's argument. But the number one damage I see is if I just look at the progress that we have seen in the women's game and I see names like Cami Granato in the Hall of Fame, and I look back and I wonder, well, would Cami Granato be in the Hall of Fame were it not for that Olympic opportunity? Would Cami Granato have kept playing were it not for that Olympic opportunity? Would women's hockey be at the level that it is now were it not for that opportunity? The answer to all those questions is probably no, you know? So the argument that it doesn't belong at the Olympics to me is just tired and lazy. And I drafted a couple of tweets and thought about sending them out, and they were a little too spicy. And then I just thought I'm gonna leave this alone because I don't want to give it more air, you know? I don't think that topic deserves any air. And I think the last two Olympics, the highlight in my mind, and I think for a lot of people, has been that women's gold medal final. And so to strip that moment from history books to me is just shameful.
I was in the stands with my dad for the 2010 Olympics women's gold medal game. Obviously, I know Jen Botterill a little bit from her being around Winnipeg here, and I loved it. I loved the energy and the atmosphere in the building. It was one of the most fantastic sporting events I've been able to see live. You mentioned Cami Granato, Kristina. I mean, what does it mean? Obviously, Emily Castonguay gets hired as an assistant GM. Cami Granato goes to the Canucks. What does that mean? I mean, obviously, the NHL still has a long way to go in terms of inclusivity and you know, broader voices. But what does it mean to see some of those trailblazers kind of making some strides in the game as well at the NHL level?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I think it's been a long time coming, and I think that, as you said, there's more progress necessary. I can think of tons of other women that deserve those opportunities, but the good news is, and I went to Seattle for the home opener and did a feature on Cami, and she was talking about how, and this was crazy to me. I mean, and she's 50 years old and has been around the game as long as she's been around the game, and she had never thought that, oh, I could be a scout for an NHL team, because she'd never seen a woman in that position. And that's the old, if you can see it, you can be it argument. But yeah, people like Cami are now in those positions, and I think what that's going to lead to is more women in those rooms, and I think, and in those organizations, and that diversity of opinion and voices, I think, is so important. And I don't think just gender or just race, but even like the age of the people, where they come from in that room, you all bring a different perspective. And I think that it's really important to have as much diversity in terms of who you've got in your organization as you can. And obviously hires like Cami Granado are a great step in that direction.
You and I had a blast a couple of years ago covering a playoff series between the Ottawa Senators and the Boston Bruins. The year that the Ottawa Senators went and lost in 7 games to the Penguins, who went on and won that cup. Is that 15, 16, Ken? I think it was 15, 2015, I believe it was. We had the honor of working alongside Greg Millen and Christine Simpson, who was hosting that game, and had a ton of fun with them. I know that you just absolutely adore Christine, and that was a fun little sojourn we got to have with them afterwards. I take a look at her, yourself, Tara Sloan, Emily Kaplan. I could go on and on and on, but I notice, and I've watched kind of the relationship between you and Christine since we had that, and the way that you guys interact online. There's a real network of women, I find, who are one, supportive of each other, but two, kind of have the same, goals and ideas and mindsets, and pushing a lot of these issues that we've been talking about down the road. And I wanted to get your take on, you said you've been at Sportsnet for 10 years, how maybe you've seen that network of women grow, or maybe it hasn't grown enough. I wanted to get your take on what you've seen over your career and where we're at with the voices of people such as yourself and pushing things forward.
Yeah, I would say it has grown since I started there. We have Emily Sadler on our staff, who's a really talented writer and editor. And I will say, having somebody like Christine Simpson, I remember covering my first playoff series. I have no idea what year that would be, but I wandered into some room, probably looked quite lost. And she introduced me to the team's PR person and made sure that I got an interview with Claude Giroux that same day. And having the support of people like her is so important, I think, too, for young women. I'm not young anymore, but I mean, when you break in, it does feel like a male-dominated industry. And I think just knowing that women are supportive of each other is a really important part of things. And we've had great women. We had Julia Cruz for some time at Sportsnet as well, really phenomenal writer. So I do think we need more women in positions at Sportsnet, but it has gotten a little bit better since I got there. But still, progress would be good in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, even that too. I mean, I mentioned Jen Botterill earlier. I mean, the whole "you can see it, you can be it." I mean, what do you think it means to have someone like Jen, who's so articulate and bright, on Hockey Night in Canada on a panel?
Yeah, she is unbelievable, and I think, and watching too, Shannon Zabados and Megan Mickelson on the Olympic panel, they're killing it, and they're bringing such phenomenal perspective in terms of bringing you into the dressing room and having played with a lot of those players. And their knowledge of the game, like back to what I was saying before, they're such smart players, right? And I think, yeah, it's just, that's a major thing, seeing somebody like Jen on a panel regularly on Hockey Night in Canada. And hopefully there's young women watching her and thinking that could be me one day.
My dad was an old school, crusty phys ed teacher, and kind of really fit that 1970s, 80s mold. But one thing that was different about him is he was a very outspoken feminist, and he was, a lot of the he was one of the, or a very high up volleyball coach in women's volleyball. So being raised by him, it was always, I don't want to say crammed down my throat, but he made it that there was no way that I was not going to fight for those same ideals that he fought for. And so I wonder about going through what you've gone through. You have a son. Sometimes we like to dive into parenting in this. And I want to get an idea if you've formulated kind of an idea of the things that you believe in and how you're going to instill those in your son.
Yeah, well, one of Mac's favorite T-shirts is I think it's an Under Armour T-shirt. It's a hand-me-down, and it says "Girls always win" on it. So I think that tells you a fair bit. The people at the daycare love that T-shirt. I I was quite sad actually when I found out I wasn't sad when I found out he was a boy, but I really wanted to have a girl so she could play at the Swansea Girls Hockey League, and I asked the president if he would allow a boy, and he said no. But absolutely, I think about this all the time. I've been in sports writing for, I don't know, 15 years, and sometimes I think, oh, maybe I could go in a different direction. But I do think it's important, and maybe this is silly, but I want to provide an example for not just Mac, but other kids that women are in. I still think this is a non-traditional role. And I think growing up with Mac, growing up around a mom in a non-traditional role, and two, with my nieces and nephews, knowing that I write about sports, I think it just opens their eyes too to more possibilities beyond maybe what's considered conventional. So that didn't really answer your question, but I tried.
That's good stuff. Kristina, it's been absolutely awesome having you and chatting with you. I have one last question, and I've been bugging you about this for a long time. I've always tried to get you to come on TV with me. Have you overcome the fear of your voice to be on TV?
I think so. I think now that I'm older and I give less cares to the sometimes comments that I might get, yeah, I think I'm over it. I don't know that I had an aversion to it, or if I was worried about the viewers and what they might think, the hearers and the viewers. The hearers, yeah. At this point in my life, I just don't care. So sure, you let me know.
I'm looking forward to the day when it happens. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us. I mean it when I say it. I love the way that you work a room and the way that you're able to gain trust in people who barely know you. Maybe it's the voice. Maybe it's the non-threatening voice. Who knows? Maybe that's your superpower. There it is. But Kristina, thank you so much for joining us. It was great catching up with you, and can't wait till the next time we see each other on the road. And I try and keep up with you at the supper table, because this girl has a future in competitive eating if she wants it. I'll tell you that.
I can pack it back. That's true. Thank you guys so much. It was a real treat. Thanks for having me.
Great to see you.
We'll see you soon. Great talking to you. And we'll go right from that to another one of our favorites in the industry as we bring in Arash Madani. Arash, you've got a history in Winnipeg. You used to work with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I'm interested right off the bat because there's a ton of connections between you and Winnipeggers, but I want to get your take of what you took away from your time in Winnipeg, how you would kind of define this city and the people who live in it.
Well, it's funny because, hi guys.
Great to see
you. Well, the last time I was there, I think it was for a Grey Cup, and it just felt so different, even in a short time, like within 10 years. When I left, it was the old football stadium. The arena downtown was an AHL team was occupying it, and the next thing you know, in less than 10 years, they're in a new football stadium. There's an NHL team there. They're renovating it to make it a district or whatever. So it just feels like that city has changed so much in such a short period of time.
What, maybe just too, before we dive into some background, what were your thoughts on the Andrew Harris departure?
I saw it coming, to be honest with you, Kenny. It almost felt like the divorce was inevitable between both sides, between where Andrew was physically for part of the season and the fact that there had been no communication between the football team and the running back up until like a week ago or something like that. So I think there's a lot there that we don't know between both sides on how his injury rehab went and a pile of other things. So I just thought the Bombers could have handled it a lot better than they did. Just because he's a franchise icon, because of how vital he was to 2 championships, just be straight with the guy and don't let it drag on the way it did.
Arash, one of the things that really interests me in you and the way that you approach your job is, you did the PR for a while. And a lot of times when you're on the PR side of things, I think a lot of people who go that route have a tendency to play nice with it once they've been on the one side, once they get out, from inside the city's walls, they have a tendency to play nice. You aren't like that at all. You are calling a spade every opportunity that you get when you are dealing with the CFL. Why is it important for you to approach your job in that manner?
Well, it's what I do in all sports, and that's, Kenny and I always text on Sundays. Like, I'm a Vikings fan. So I just want to be shot straight on what's going on with the football team as much as possible, the football team that I like, that I follow. And I just think that a lot of people, doesn't matter if you're a Jets fan or a Bombers fan or a Leaf fan or a Raptor fan or a Blue Jay fan, the way I cover the Blue Jays, I'm not going to sugarcoat things around the baseball team, even though I cover them and even though our employer, it's all part of the parent company. There's an obligation to the people who we get a credential that gives us access, well, in the past, access to locker rooms, but access to people. And it's our job to decipher what a lot of this stuff means. And so I think that's vitally important when presenting to people is, let's talk about what this actually is. Let's not feed them a bunch of BS. And I find that there are a lot of people who feed a lot of BS.
What were your thoughts on the hire at the GM position and the pending coaching hire for the Vikings?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's a totally different regime now. It's basically everything the Vikes were, Kenny. Like, it feels like it's different. They've just decided to go. They went from, Mike Zimmer, who wanted to work with an overhead projector and a chalkboard when he first got there 8 or 9 years ago, to now a full analytics group. But what was troubling to me is that the new GM comes in and the coach he wanted to hire doesn't get hired. So who's calling the shots is what I'm starting to wonder. Because if it's a GM, who is it?
Right, that was weird. Sorry, Sean, before we move on off the Vikings, I mean, what did you make of the Harbaugh flirtation / no offer given? I mean, that it seemed like when he got on the plane, I'm pretty sure you and I both thought he was going to be hired that next day.
And I think Jim Harbaugh thought so too, which is why he skipped out on National Signing Day to go to Minneapolis. So I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was control over the roster. I don't know if Jed York, the present San Francisco owner, talked shit about his old coach. I don't know what led to that, but weird. Wait, fellas, it feels so short here. I mean, Sean's towering over me.
Can you alter your camera or get a higher chair or something like that? I'm not worried about it if you're not worried about it.
One second. Arash, Sean goes on his tippy toes when we do our hits just so that he feels taller than me.
There you go.
Again, we both know I don't need to go on my tippy toes. Arash, you that's one of the things that you have in common with Winnipeggers is that there's a whole ton of Vikings fans in this area here. You're not from Winnipeg originally, so you didn't come by being a Minnesota Vikings fan by way of proximity. So the question that I've asked it to you before, I'm sure our audience would like to know why you torture yourself in the way that so many fans here in Winnipeg choose to torture themselves by becoming a Minnesota Vikings fan.
Well, I had no choice in the matter. It was in the womb. My dad was a huge Vikings fan, so I was indoctrinated into it. And what misery it is. And I remember, I don't know if I shared this with you, Sean, or not. So on a Monday in mid-June in 2019, I was walking home, and I'd been outside in a dead heat of summer day for like 7 or 8 hours. And I was covering an event that was supposed to last like 3 hours, and it ended up lasting a lot longer. I'm hungry, I'm dehydrated, I'm sunstroked, whatever. And I called my father, and I said, you really are an asshole. And he's like, excuse me? And I said, I'm leaving this Raptors parade, this championship parade. And we grew up in Nova Scotia. And I'm like, I'm not even that big a Raptor fan. Like, I like basketball, but I grew up with Magic and Kareem. And I'm like, we grew up in Nova Scotia. We had all the Boston affiliates. I would have had like 7 of these. Because we just had Patriots shoved down our throats. And like I remember when New England was 1-15, and that's when they went and drafted Bledsoe, which led to Brady. Instead of having 7, you got me on the Vikings. Like the worst sad sack franchise you could ever imagine.
Hey, we'll always have Diggs sideline touchdown, unbelievable, Arash.
Yeah. Second round playoff wins, the highlight of what we got, Kenny. Ain't that lovely?
Oh man, maybe let's shift gears a little bit. Arash, would like to tell the story behind the storyteller. How did you get bitten by the journalism bug?
I think from a young age, guys. I kind of watch first the NBA on CBS, and then Marv Albert and those guys do it. Jim Huber used to kind of pen essays for CNN way back in the day. And I just thought that was really cool. And I really like the idea of storytelling. As important as reporting is, I think that especially now there's so much information out there. It's just a way to kind of connect people and tell something about your subject that hasn't been unearthed yet. And I really enjoy that part of it. And kind of, I just finished writing a Roger Federer career retrospective for whenever his time comes, so we can hit play on it. It's like, how do you turn a 20-year career into 4 minutes? And to tell that story. And I kind of enjoy the challenge of it. I enjoy the creativity of it. I like the blank canvas and being able to do things with it. So I don't know when it first started, but it's been that way for a long time.
Yeah, I had to do the same with Dale Hawerchuk, and it's funny, you're trying to pick up on those little pieces, like you talk about the long career, those little pieces that would kind of connect and resonate most with the fans. It's interesting when there's so much to take from. You mentioned being your roots as from Truro, Nova Scotia. I noticed that yourself, a guy like Kenny Reid, people who are from the East love to talk about the East, and I wonder what it is about that upbringing that so sticks with people, that creates the pride that it does, that people in our industry just love to talk about it.
It's a great question. I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe that. I'm just trying to think. Like when Kenny and I were coming up, we're around the same age. He's older, for the record.
And bolder.
More of an asshole. Yeah, is that what bolder means?
You guys have it covered. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Like we're fiercely proud of kind of who we are and what we are, but there weren't, like, Sidney Crosby didn't exist when we were growing up. Nathan McKinnon wasn't walking through that door. Even in our industry, Alex J. Walling was TSN's Halifax correspondent whenever something would kind of come to the East Coast, but it wasn't that. So I think that's part of it. And it's funny, like the town I grew up in, there was always this idea presented to us from our coaches that, shoot, someone's got to do it. Why not be you? It doesn't matter where you're from. So that kind of attitude, the want to go get it, go do it. I think that's a big part of it too.
How about you? What drew you to the TV side, Arash? I mean, obviously, I know you talked about, whether it was Pat O'Brien and maybe even Ahmad Rashad during those Bulls years, right? Doing the intermission or interviews and all those things behind the scenes. But who were some of the guys maybe you looked up to, and what kind of had you drawn to the TV side of things?
Dick Stockton was one of my favorites. He was the lead NBA play-by-play person. I mentioned Jim Huber. I still can't believe Al Michaels is doing it. Like, he's won the Super Bowl at the age of 77 on Sunday. Yeah. And it's not that he hasn't lost his fastball. He's still a Cy Young Award winner. Like, it's wild. There were a bunch. Like, I think the TV side is one, but like I had a Sports Illustrated subscription. I'd read a pile of newspapers. Like, I remember we'd be on family trips, and whenever we'd stop for gas or a break or whatever, like, I'd throw 50 cents into a newspaper box and just, wherever we may be, wherever, Montreal Gazette or the Ottawa Citizen or the Boston Globe or whatever. I was always kind of interested in information and in knowledge, and that was always kind of a big part of it too.
I want to go back to your role when you were with the Bombers working PR. It's a different job, and around that time, there was kind of this unwritten rule that, it was kind of like that in politics, kind of like that in sports. When you went and worked with the team, it made it difficult to leave that side and go into the journalistic side of things. But I've always thought, Gary Lawless is another guy who comes up. I've always thought there's an advantage that path creates, in that I like the way that people who have done the job that you did on PR seem to interact with athletes. And I wonder if you see an advantage in having worked side by side, shoulder to shoulder with the athletes before going to the other side and covering them journalistically.
I think athletes, Sean, is just part of it. When you're in it, you realize how vital the role of the equipment manager is. And to many on the outside, they're like, okay, well, he like washes the laundry and hangs up jock straps. There actually may not be a person in a sports organization, CEO, GM, head coach, who has more of a pulse on what is happening in a sports organization than the equipment manager and the trainer. Because they're in the locker room all the time. That is their office. They're hearing everything. They're seeing everything. They're watching the daily interactions with everybody. The trainer knows that if Ken Weeb's got to show up for treatment at 7 a.m., is he the dude who's on the table at 10 to 7? Or is he straggling in at 10 after 7 with booze on his breath? Yes, interacting with players and doing that on a regular basis, yes, that's a big part of it. What so often often we look at moves that an organization will make and you judge it based on what that move is. What I really learned, and I worked for Winnipeg and Ottawa, is what this move means what for the next series of moves. What does this now mean moving forward? What were they thinking when they actually said this publicly? If they're saying A, but I'm seeing B, where is this headed? There are a lot of things that you don't think about until you're in it every day. That's a big part of it, because I think my interaction with athletes on the PR side helped me learn how to communicate in a different language. Once I returned to the media side, but I think more than that, what it taught me was organizationally, when decisions are made, what went into that decision. And so often, especially now in an analytics world, and there's so many numbers out there, everybody looks at moves that are made based on what stats are and what projections are. This is a workplace. This is a locker room where not everybody's got to get along with everybody, but if you're a piece of shit, there are some organizations who will tolerate it for a while, and there are some organizations that won't. And how you interact with people, how you interact with your teammates, how you treat people, doesn't matter if you're the CEO of the team or the assistant equipment person. All of that, you get a sense from an organization how much they value some of that. And I think that's what really opened my eyes, being on the inside of things, was, there were so many things I had no idea about what made an organization tick and what made an organization go. And as much as it's about winning, it's pro sports, and as much as your value is tied to your production, there's a lot more that can go into it. And if you're a rebuilding team, if you're a young team, what kind of vet do you want to have around? All of that is significant. And those are some of the things I really took from being on the inside when I left to get back into the media side.
Another important thing there too is the building of cultures, Arash, right? I mean, and then also too, having worked in Winnipeg, what was it like for you to see what the Blue Bombers have built under the Wade Miller, Kyle Walters, Mike O'Shea regime? And for me, it often goes back to the Stanley Bryant and Andrew Harris signings, where the culture started to change. How about for you?
Look, I think Bryant's one of the best offensive linemen of the 2000s, of the last quarter century. And what Harris did was terrific. And culture gets thrown around a lot. I get that. But Kenny, let's also be honest. If they hadn't pulled the trigger on a Zach Collaros trade that was probably done a few minutes after the deadline, but got processed anyway, Collaros that really at that time nobody wanted, we're not having this conversation. I think so often we're looking for signs of things that are. In a lot of ways, pro sports is also about pure luck too. And the Collaros thing was a big part of the luck, but then you had Bryant, and then you had Harris. And, they had one of the guys that I thought they really hit a home run on last year was Big Hill, a dude who took a significant pay cut, and instead of whining about it, instead of making an issue of it, he's like, let's just go win. And I thought that spoke volumes about the character of Adam Big Hill in addition to the ability.
Arash, I don't have the details of this entirely hammered out here, so I'm going to need you to help me. But you did something that was maybe my favorite moment I've watched a journalist perform on live TV. I thought it was during the 2015 celebration after the Jays beat the Texas Rangers, and I can't remember who the player was, but you were interviewing players afterwards, and they were celebrating and they're happy, right? And you're with the team and you're one of the hosts, and he turned to kind of hug you on live TV.
Oh, yeah.
And you stopped.
Yeah.
There you go. And was this 2015?
Yeah, 15 or 16, one of the two, yeah.
He turns to you to go kind of like move in, and you turn to him and you said, "What, do you want a hug?" And the thing about it is, like, to me, in the moment that you did that, you created a clear line that you were a journalist and you were doing a job, and that job did not include cheerleading alongside the team that you covered, right? Which to me is, in my mind, is undoubtedly the right move to make. Now, a lot, and you touched on this earlier in the show, a lot of other people in your position would have been overjoyed to jump in and join in the celebration and do that, hug the player in that moment. I want to get your take on the lines drawn between you in your job, which brings you close to athletes. But, it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but you definitely have a clear definition of where you lie in relation to them. And give me an idea of why it's important for you to approach the job that way.
Well, if I was getting a playoff share, if I was a member of the staff of the team, if I was getting the 180 Gs for getting to the ALCS, maybe I would have hugged the Adrini that day. 180 US, I may add, Sean, but that wasn't in the cards. I am not in uniform. I don't work for the team. And so as a result, I'm not hugging anybody. It's better for business. It's better for ratings. It's better for my career as somebody who covers the baseball team when they're doing well, because more eyeballs are there and whatever. No question. But I'm not a member of the organization. I'm not one of the fellas. So that's that. And I think what's really important is, I think from a professionalism standpoint, when you're around it every day, I got to deal with Joe Biagini and Bo Bichette and Vlad Guerrero and whomever, Alec Manoah every day. So you have to be there when times are good. You have to be there when times are bad. You have to show up when you offer criticism, and you have to make sure that they know you have a job to do just like they have a job to do. And I try and respect the job that they have to do every day and pick my spots when I'm asking for some of their time. But it's easy to get caught up in it, but I think it's important not to get too caught up in it.
Great way to assess that situation, Arash. Speaking of the Major League Baseball, what do you see as the next turn in the lockout here?
I really don't know. This league and these owners and this commissioner seems like they're hell-bent on cannibalizing their industry and their business from within. Nobody's talking about baseball. Fewer and fewer young people are following baseball. Metrics are down. Attention is down. So what do? You lock out. And then for him to come out today and say that, owners take a big risk in owning franchises. Name me a business not named Google, Apple, and like Peloton. They just whacked 20% of the workforce, that has seen better growth than owning a professional sports franchise or a Major League Baseball franchise. And somebody from Bloomberg today said, year over year, the average value of a franchise grows 12.5%. So if you bought a team 15 years ago for just shy of $1 billion, it's now doubled. Our beloved Vikes, Kenny, the Wilfs bought it in 2006, 2007 for around $700 million. They could sell it tomorrow for $2.7 billion easily. When the billionaires are crying poor, that's when you know that this plot is completely lost. And I think that's exactly what and where baseball is right now, lost.
I don't want to push off from that subject because I think it's really interesting. I did want to get this in while we had you here, though. Arash, you have covered, a ton of stuff, sports right across the spectrum. You know your stuff when it comes to tennis. You're our guy when it comes to the Olympics. You and I actually were supposed to be in China right now covering it before it all blew up. Basketball, baseball, like you have, a lot of people would get to the position where you're in right now, the job you have, and that would be the dream job, and they would leave it at that, and that's all they would do. But you dive back in again and time again into all kinds of different sports, and I'm wondering what it is about sports in general that keeps your interest and has kept you from kind of just burrowing into one sport and staying there.
Probably a little bit of ADHD. I think that's part of it. Part of it is, I'm often asked, Sean, like, what's your favorite sport to cover? And my answer, honestly, is the variety of it. And I find that when I dip into amateur sports like the Olympics or doing youth sports, it helps me out on the professional side and vice versa. I find when I work individual sports, it gives a perspective that I don't think about when I'm working a pro sports locker, team sports locker room. You get a chance to interact with so many different people who have so many different perspectives, and it really helps a lot of different avenues in which you do. It just helps you in your storytelling and your reporting and in how you view situations and how different people handle things. So I think that's all part of it. And yeah, I just enjoy it. Like, we're very fortunate, guys. Our hobbies and our careers intersect. There's probably 20 nights a year, maybe 30 nights a year that I'm not watching a game of some sort, because that's what I want to do in my off time, my spare time, my non-actual work time. And sometimes you'll often pick something up by just watching something, either a technique that another announcer uses, or you see a player that you may see down the road and you're like, oh yeah, I remember him. So all that plays into it.
We like to talk about, personal things. What's been the biggest challenge of the pandemic? I mean, for Sean and me, we haven't really done a lot. We've had one road trip this year. What's it been like for you? I know you're still doing some travel, but maybe not as much in the years past. How have you dealt with some of those challenges of not having the same interactions that we have had in the past?
Yeah, I think that was the biggest challenge. Like, after the first wave, when we didn't know what the heck any of this was, after I realized we're not all going to shrivel up and die if I touch my doorknob going outside, was when baseball returned for that 60-game season, and we covered it, real air quotes, from a voiceover booth at the office. like my jam when I go to a baseball game to cover a baseball game is I'll show up at 3 or 3:30 for a 7 o'clock game and just hang out in the dugout and talk to people, or stand beside the dugout, or on the field, or by the cage, or whatever, and just have conversations. All of that is gone, and your only availability being Zoom or one-on-one interview over headset. That wasn't for me how I go about it. Most of how I get my info, or just most of how I go about it, are informal conversations that lead to bigger things. I'll give you an example. I remember we talked about the Raptors earlier. 2019, we were in Texas. Kenny, the weekend of
Yes.
Ferris Wheelers.
Yes, beautiful.
Ferris Wheelers, yeah.
Yes. I was, I'm following the Raptor game on my phone, and Tim Meza comes out. He's from Ancaster, Pennsylvania, and that was the Raptors Sixers series. And then Aaron Sanchez is there. He's like, "What are you guys doing?" He's like, I saw Kawhi play in high school. I'm like, "What?" Grew up in Barstow, California. And, Kawhi was the big Anyway, fast forward a few weeks later, and the Raptors clinched the East on a Saturday night, and Sunday I'm doing the Jays game. I beeline for Sanchez's locker. I'm like, "Tell me about when you saw Kawhi in high school." He's like, "Dude, I went to the game last night." And he started comparing. He said, "I was walking back to my condo and everyone's going crazy. It reminded me of 2015, 2016. When I went and saw him in high school, it was this and that." So just, a casual conversation can lead to that. That doesn't happen over Zoom. That'll never happen over Zoom. So access was the biggest challenge of all from just how I do my gig.
I remember being at that game, the baseball game you were covering the night we all went to Ferris Wheelers, and exactly like you're saying, standing in the dugout. I think there was 3 or 4 of us from the hockey beat who came down and chatted with you because you were so accessible, exactly like you're saying.
Yeah.
Last one for me. I'm going to kind of wrap a bow on this and go back to the Winnipeg connections. The first time I ever met you, Arash, was covering the return of the Jets to Winnipeg.
Yes.
You were working for Sportsnet at the time, as you have been ever since. But for you, having been to the city, but also being a Canadian and seeing, a hockey team return to Canada, which I think everyone is waiting with bated breath. I think they're going to go blue in the face if they wait for it to go back to Quebec City. But it's a meaningful event. I wanted you to give me an idea of what covering that event meant to you as someone who had spent time in Winnipeg, but as a Canadian who saw hockey coming back, and just where that event kind of ranks in the things that you've covered over your career.
What I didn't realize until that week was how much it meant to the people there. Like the NHL doesn't mean much to me. I didn't grow up with hockey, so there's not really a pull for me. I grew up in the East Coast where there are as many Bruins fans in Nova Scotia, not because of Brad Marchand. This is when Brad was, twinkle in his parents' eye.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what really stuck out to me was how much it mattered to so many people in Winnipeg and throughout Manitoba that the team was coming back. And I think, quite honestly, I don't even think Mark Chipman really knew, because they were hell-bent. If you remember, guys, they did not want to call them the Jets. That was the last thing they wanted, was to call them the Jets. And then they ended up almost feeling forced to call them the Jets, and I think it was the best thing they did. To create those connections and all those kinds of things. And I think that was my biggest takeaway going back was, I don't know, there was talk of the polar bears and a bunch of other things. I remember getting on that plane, coming back, saying to myself, man, they got to call them the Jets. There's no choice in this matter because of how important it was to so many people there. And you talk about Howard Chuck and Timu and all the guys who have been connected to that franchise over the years. It meant something to them too. And I think that's what made the uniqueness of that return really so striking.
Yeah, I think people had been calling to bring back the Jets for so long. Once the NHL came back, I don't think that the people were accepting anything other than that. Arash, it's been unbelievable to spend time with you. You're a wealth of knowledge and information. I do have to say this. I take a look like you. I like to get out and I like to cover different sports. I love getting on the curling beat. But you kind of amaze me in the way that I remember when I was a kid, I used to know all the sports and all the players and all the different sports, especially the big four. But doing this job that I do now, you're so focused in on hockey. I've let a lot of that knowledge go by the wayside. Your ability to go from sport to sport to sport and have the depth of knowledge that you do in all those different sports is truly astounding. It's why you do the Olympics so well, and yet you dive as deep as you do into baseball. It's truly impressive the way you do that. And I'm so glad that you stopped by to share some of your knowledge with us here today.
No, I appreciate the kind words. It's great to be teammates with you guys too, man. Hopefully we'll be at Ferris Wheelers or something like that. Sometime soon, crushing some IPAs.
Yeah, exactly. That was a legendary night. It was glad to have shared it with you. All right, Arash, thank you so much for joining us.
See you, boys.
Have a great day, my man.
Well, Ken, what do you think?
Oh, tons of fun as usual. The night of the game that we attended, Vladdy Guerrero's first MLB RBI was on the agenda before the great barbecue meal that we had with our friends that were covering the Stars and Blues, and then some of the Jays folks as well. The other thing I want to share quickly too. I mean, Arash, you guys got me thinking about it. So it was not the day of the press conference announcing the Jets' return, but the day that Stephen Brunt's story broke in the Globe and Mail. I was on holidays that week. I was over at my friend Ray Carrier's place. We were watching playoff hockey. Story breaks. I make some calls. I'm trying to get confirmation, everything else, but I wasn't writing, and so people were handling it nationally. I decided to go down to Portage in Maine for the impromptu street hockey game, just to kind of get a feel for what was actually happening, and ran into Hustler there. I did not pick up a stick and get involved in the game when the Portage and Maine was closed down, but just like to reiterate what Arash was saying, to see what it meant to the community, the return, and how it sort of made everybody feel so much civic pride. I mean, I covered the Moose for 10 years. The Moose was a great product. When I worked at the Sun, we treated the Moose like an NHL team. We were on the road full time, everything else, but to see what happened when the team was announced to be coming back, and to see the explosion at downtown, I think was something that I'll remember for a really long time. And I'm glad that I went to witness it. And again, I wrote the day after about it. And it was something that, I'll always remember that. I mean, you know what it's like traveling around, and, people were, grew a couple inches and felt like they just felt that enormous civic pride. And that was something that was really cool to kind of see that outpouring that night at Portage in Maine.
Yeah, I was there. I was at that. It may have been the live stand-up that I did there. That was on my demo reel that got me the job in sports at Sportsnet. It certainly helped because people kind of went nuts in the background and people are going crazy around you. And I do remember too, still working at CBC and going live when the announcement was made. You'll remember some of the videos. Sam Cates led a conga line at the Forks.
Oh, yeah. I do, yeah. Yeah,
I remember being there for that, and I was at the Forks for not only was I inside when the announcement was made, but then at 6:00 we went live down at the Forks. And I remember someone coming over and on live TV, and it's funny, I tell my kids the story because there's sometimes they'll see you going live and people all around there. It can be a weird situation, right? And I remember someone poured a beer on my head, but it was live on live TV. Someone poured a beer on my head, but it was done not in like, let's stick it to this guy because he stuck around. It was done in that, like, we just won something and like, let's pour a beer on each other's head
Gatorade
and
shower.
Celebrate, right? Like the guy didn't turn around and take off after he did it. He hung around and looked at me, and I remember being live on air and the look on my face as the beer was pouring through my hair and down my face, and I looked over him, and the look on his face was just pure joy, and like, we did it, right? But it was that was a moment. And it's funny, Ken, being in news, I remember working at Global starting in, I think it was 2008. The amount of stories we did about, are the Jets coming back? Like, as a journalist, you would have gone through this probably more than anyone. That constantly doing the stories of what if and could it happen, to finally have it happen. Putting those stories in the rearview mirror was celebration enough as it was, because you actually got to talk about the team now rather than the potential of the team, which was a ton of fun. I just, to this day, I remember Arash being there and going and chatting with him. You could tell he felt like he was, part of something, big announcement, and boy, was it ever. And not just Arash doing great here today, but Kristina Rutherford is absolutely one of my favorites on the road. She's a courageous gal, and I mean everything I say about it. When she goes into a room, that girl knows how to work a room, gain people's trust, and tells really, really good stories. I love her writing. It's good stuff. Check it out if you haven't already. Her piece on Marie-Philippe Poulin, just absolutely great stuff, as all her Olympic coverage has been so far. So if you haven't checked that out yet, make sure you go to sportsnet.ca where you can check all that out.
I put the link in, I think, earlier.
Yes,
here.
Ken did. If you want to go look in the chat room, Ken put it in earlier. Other than that, we will be back tomorrow night after the game against the Dallas Stars, where we're going to see if the Jets can start putting some wins together here. We have some special announcements regarding merchandise for that show, so make sure you tune in for that. Other than that, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Really appreciate your time here. We're looking forward to spending more with you on Friday after that game against the Dallas Stars. See you later.